I'm Steve Halsey. I'm one of the principals here at GNS, and I head up our business communications practice. As we look at the business consulting, there's a lot of areas that we're seeing a lot more discussions with clients, with prospects, with many of you in this room. And it's kind of interesting. When we go back a few years ago, the discussion about communications was, how do we get a seat at the table? Right? We know the corporate narrative. We know the context. How do we really influence the discussion? So we've got a seat at the table. And then we looked around and we said, well, look at all this technology that's out there. If only we could harness the same technology that the marketers have, we could be doing something differently. And so with all this convergence and with all this change, something interesting is happening to the communications function. More and more, we are becoming stewards of the brand. More and more, we are owning that corporate brand in a way that we never have before. So when we're looking at this, it really starts at a lot of different levels. At the most basic level, we're being asked about things like brand identity and brand narrative. How do we refresh those, right? We're trying to do a trade show. It looks like a NASCAR. How do we make this thing look a little bit better? So those are pretty good. We can get in there. We can start moving a little bit into the world of marketing. We can start being held accountable for KPIs like recognition, consistency, things like that. But as we then think about that brand, a different element starts coming into it, that element of storytelling. So we look at it at that next level, which is, how do we make brand be a competitive differentiation for the company? How do we get that to really play in? How do we get other parts of the organization to think and act like the brand we've created? So we can now start looking at a bunch of different KPIs. We can start doing gap analysis. We can start comparing ourselves to our competitors, and we think we're doing pretty good. Right? There's another level that we can go, which is really looking at brand as the agent of change. And so when we look at what we had just talked about in the previous session in terms of talking about the power of the story and about the power to deliver it and different ways to disseminate it, that's when it really becomes powerful, when we as stewards of the brand can use it to have discussion with HR, to have discussions with marketing in a way that allows us to move the enterprise forward in a way that delivers significant business value. And I like to think of this new world that we're living in as the game of brands. And you are all players of game of brands. Don't believe me? Let me put you in a little fictional world here. I'll call this fictional world a market. And in this market, you have a benevolent dictator that we call a CEO. CEO sets up a really good framework. The CEO has charged you to make the kingdom strong and proud. So who do you go talk to first? You go talk to the head of the army, right? You want to make sure you've got a good wall built up. What does the head of the army say? Hey, all we need is product, right? Everybody understands we got a good product. People are going to buy from us. They're going to love us. We don't need anything else but product. We look out at our alliances. What do we have? Our best customers are also our fiercest competitors. Sounds like a fictional world, or does it sound like what you do every day? So as we look at that, change is constant. Change is never static. And I think this is a fascinating study that came out in terms of asking CMOs, what are the biggest things that are impacting your brand out there? Look at the top two, disruption in my industry and technology change. Who here in this audience does not have disruption in their industry and no technology change? No hands. That is the reality of what we're dealing with. We also got economic uncertainty. Those of us that are in the agribusiness, not just the consolidation there, but they can't get the fields planted because it's been raining so much in the Midwest. Just when you think you have your policy going with China and with Mexico, whoa, are there tariffs? Are there not tariffs? There's certainly a degree of uncertainty that's coming in a way that we've never had to play it before. So if you had to invest, because right now most corporations in the U.S. have more cash on hand than they've ever had, what would you invest in, right? You got to keep the lights on, so I'll give you that one. But what else would you invest in? What do you think would be the most invested things in corporate America that impact what you have to do as a communicator? Emily? Research? Maybe. Our researcher wants more research. What about somebody else? Brand reputation is what you would see. What about what are our two biggest challenges? Technology. So you think technology is going to be the big spend, right? Wrong. Technology is about on par with keeping the lights on. So about 8% more being spent there. Where are we spending money? We need bigger armies. We need bigger alliances. M&A is where it's going. So reality is if you're sitting in a publicly traded company and you're not about to acquire somebody or somebody's not trying to acquire you, you're in a very unique situation because it really is a market of consolidation. But what's interesting to me is how different it is now than it was 5 years ago. 5 years ago, it was all about diversification. How do we find different industries, different technologies, different framework? What do we have now? We've got more consolidation of the same. How do we get that critical mass that's out there? Just look at the M&As that are happening out there. Look at Dow and DuPont coming together, shuffling things up, and then breaking themselves out. Look at Bayer and Monsanto. You can go over and over. Look at the telecom industry. It really is an interesting world where the landscape is shifting, where it was much easier to talk about and managing M&As if they were in adjacent industries or different things. It's very different when you've got to put things together where there's going to be a clear winner or loser. And as we all know, M&As don't always go swimmingly well. Sometimes activist investors may sneak in and disrupt things. Sometimes we don't see the value. Sometimes we can't get out of our own way. And those are all challenges that we're faced together as communicators. And when those challenges happen in the past, what could we do? We just turn the microphone up to number 11, right? Like this is Spinal Tap. Just turn it up to number 11 and just push that message out and drown everybody out. We can't do that anymore because we don't own the conversation around our brand. Our employees own it. Our investors own it. Our customers own it. And that conversation is going on 24/7. I'm making you guys feel really good about choosing this as a profession right now, aren't I? But we're smart people, right? We're good at the game of brands. We've got a strategy in place for this, don't we? Right? We saw a little sneak peek of this strategy just a few minutes ago. We've got the ability to slice and dice our audience in a way that we have never been able to do before. Looking at affinity, or did they click on something before, or do we have their email address, or did we look on Facebook and realize it's somebody's anniversary today? We've got the ability to look at where they sit in that sales funnel way never before and really hit it pretty targeted. So I thought it would be fun, given the theme, to ask the internet, well, I want to buy a dragon. What do I need to consider? I thought that'd be a fairly unique request. But unfortunately, in the world of algorithms, we are all remarkably predictable. And this is one of the great powers that we have as communicators is if we harness the right tools or the technologies of AI, we can be very predictive in how we stage our brand story. So in case you were wondering why you want to buy a dragon, my favorite reason is because it's better than a unicorn. I mean, what more do you need than that? A dragon's better than a unicorn. So as we think about our role and how we impact the bottom line and make the brand as an asset, it's all about business strategy, right? We've got a seat at the table. It's all how are we better at business strategy. I see heads nodding, so good. We're good business strategists. But that's only half the story. Because how are you going to rally people? Are you going to rally them around a Gantt chart? You're going to rally people around Helvetica type? I mean, those are great things. Or are you going to rally them around a story, inspire people to pick up their spears and take on this great battle, whatever the epic battle is, to make the world more sustainable, to make software a little bit cheaper? You've got to have the power of story to rally people. And so when I think of brands, what was the original brand? The original brand was your tribe. It was the people in the tent with you. It was the people in the cave with you. And what was the original brand story? How to live. We hunt together, we can eat the buffalo. I wander alone, the bear eats me, right? Very simple messages that set the framework and the context. And as we evolved, our brands got bigger. Our brand became culture. Our brand became society. We had ways to mass produce this, but if you look at the essence of the story, it's still the same. And if you look at the importance of visuals, it's still the same. We pat ourselves on the back and say, wow, look at all these awesome infographics. First infographic was on a cave wall. And today, the power of story still plays through. We asked a couple weeks ago, we fielded a survey of US adults. 2/3 of people think it's important for brands to tell a great story. So we should all pat ourselves on the back, right? I mean, we're communicators. And more than 70% of people want to hear the stories we have to tell. Isn't that awesome? But unfortunately, more than half of them can't remember ever hearing a good story. So there's a little gulf and a little gap for us to take up from that standpoint. And why is there a gap? Because storytelling is not easy. It is very difficult. Pixar, which has, about 19 Academy Awards for the various categories, has 22 rules for storytelling. Can you imagine that? 22. Can you imagine if internally we were able just to commit to 3? But 22 rules for storytelling. And what I find fascinating is, what is the number one rule? You admire the character's journey more so than the end results. But when we talk to our organization, they're like, well, just tell them about the ROI. Just tell them about the return. Just tell them about the yield and they'll buy. That's all we need to know. No, you need to understand the story. There's power in story. And as I think about one of the most powerful brands in terms of sports, I'm a big fan of Michael Jordan, not for his 6 rings or the greatest of all time in terms of what he achieved, but the power of the story, the power of getting cut from your high school basketball team and saying, you know what, I'm going to turn around and be better. The power of being told, you know what, you can't be a good college player because you're not tall enough. Those are incredible things. And I think that's a good illustration in terms of the power of story. And there are about 7 different types of stories that you can tell. You know, there's the battling the monster and conquering the monster. There's going out on the quest. There's tragedy, there's comedy, and then, of course, you know, romantic comedy. There's the return home. Everybody loves the good return home story. But when we think about telling stories, we can't tell stories over 2 hours, right? We just heard the average piece of content. Somebody's going to decide in half a second whether or not they're going to engage with it. So we need to put them down in more bite-sized elements. And how you have to do that is you have to tell a story that addresses an inherent conflict, has a resolution, gives a reward for what you want to do. And whether that's a longer form story or whether it's a tweet, that's a good format because we really like it. We also have the power now not just to tell the same story. It doesn't always have to be a white paper. It doesn't always have to be a testimonial. It doesn't always have to be a tweet. We need to stagger the kind of content we have to appeal to the head, the heart, and the spirit. And to think about our industries and how we're talking about that journey of the hero, the customer is the hero, fighting this epic battle. How do we visualize that story? How do we take it forward? And as one of the great philosophers of all time, Tyrion, said, what unites people? Is it the sheer strength of army? Is it the promise of gold, of money? Is it about the affinity we have with flags? He said, no. It's about stories. Here we have a series for 8 years was about who could have the biggest army, or who had the dragon, or who had the dead resurrected and fighting for him. It was all about war and conflict. And at the climax of the show, it was all about the fact that nothing can beat a good story. A good story transcends all. Nothing can stop it. No one can defeat it. It tells our story of our victories, our defeats, and our past. So we're thinking, storyteller's the clear winner, right? It's not strategy, it's how do we tell the story, right? So we can all agree it's on storytelling? Well, I'm a believer that strategy without story is boring, and story without strategy is just entertainment. We've got to figure out how do we tie these elements together. And at GNS, our approach is really the order in terms of which we put these together. You've got to have the business strategy. You've got to have the story, because you have that foundational business strategy should inform what your brand strategy should be. Do you build everything around a single brand? Do you build a bunch of different brands? Do you come up with these hybrid models because that makes sense? And when you get that in place, that allows you to set that framework for that brand story, to really create that connective tissue that ties everything together, and then ultimately focus on what that brand expression is going to be. And based on our experience and based on our discussions, this is where so many companies go wrong. Either you stick so much in the business strategy that you think, hey, we're a B2B brand, we don't need to tell a human story. Wrong. That's a connective tissue that breaks things together. Or you bring a bunch of people in that are dressed all in black and tell you how cool stuff is, and you come up with the coolest brand expression in the world. But it's not related to the core of what you deliver to your customers, so its life isn't so long. So those are just a couple things that we wanted to share with you today in terms of what we're seeing in terms of the game of brands. Like it or not, you are all players in the game of brand. And my challenge to you today is to think about how you leverage that business strategy and that storytelling to win today.